Good evening. It is a pleasure to see all of you, and I mean that. To actually see people is a treat. Thanks for being here tonight. My name is Scott Maxwell. I am a columnist for the Orlando Sentinel, and I want to welcome you to what I'm sure is the first live event many of us have been to in a long time. In fact, when John and Jane asked me to do this, I was a little nervous about doing it, not because I don't support the cause, but because it meant I had to put on pants. I haven't been doing that in most of these Zoom calls, and I know from some of you that I've seen you haven't been doing it either. But this was worth it, and I know that this past year has been complicated for all of us. But one of the things I think all of us can appreciate is that it's been less complicated for a lot of us than it has been for others, because we have jobs, we have savings accounts, we have 401ks. Now imagine not even having a job or the skills to get one. Imagine not even knowing how to score an interview or what to wear if you were lucky enough to score one. Again, pants are important. That is what Toolbox for Life is all about. And John and Jane Hirsch understand that poverty is complicated and messy, that everyone's pathway to destitution and desperation is different. But no matter what led people to that place in life, Toolbox for Life helps provide a path out and up. And participants, as you may know, participate in an 8-week course that is mainly designed to help them get careers in construction, and also they've done a good deal in culinary in the past. And they work with award-winning chefs, accomplished builders to learn professional skills that help them earn enough money so that the next time they have a car repair, they aren't bankrupted once again. So many people are one family emergency away from being back on the streets. They also learn not just those professional job skills, but life skills like conflict resolution, forgiveness, and the restoration of dignity. They also learn soft skills known as etiquette writing, interviewing, and even the value of thank you notes, things that maybe many of us took for granted that we knew because we grew up with lives of privilege, but that so many people do not understand. Toolbox for Life gives us a chance to share our privilege and to help change lives. So in a few minutes, you're going to hear from a pretty remarkable and inspiring speaker, and Father Greg. I think you're in for a treat if you haven't heard from him before. But first, I want to recognize the people who are responsible for this. And I see one of the, where is Jane? Is she hiding? All right, she is hiding. She's not coming up right now. But everybody, ladies and gentlemen, that is Jane Hirsch, the wonderful and talented Jane Hirsch. And now to tell you a little bit more about what they do and why they do it, please welcome to the stage John.
Jane, you're not going to get by sitting. You're going to have to stand up. So once again, my wife, Jane Hirsch. And yes, I'm getting to the point, I had a 60th birthday a couple of weeks ago, and I definitely have to wear these all the time now. Thank you for coming very much, braving the weather, and thanks, Scott, for hosting us tonight and being our MC. I also want to take the opportunity to, I don't know where Rector Scott is. I saw you earlier. Are you still here? Yes, could you stand up? Rector of All Saints. This is the third year that they have hosted us most graciously, and the staff has been excellent, kind, and couldn't be any more helpful. I also want to take the opportunity to say thanks to the companies and families and individuals that you saw on the presentation tonight on a slideshow. They have invested in what we do, and without those investments, we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do. So we are thankful for them and what they have done for us and our community. And I also appreciate greatly our volunteers. We have many of them, from our board of directors to our teachers, folks that just show up for a few minutes to many hours that they've invested, and we greatly appreciate them. One thing I wanted to note too is this is the first, raise your hand if this is the first event that you've come to for, great, wonderful, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming, thanks for braving the weather. Typically, we have this room lined from wall to wall with chefs, culinary professionals in our community, purveyors of beer, wine, desserts, other libations. It's a three-ring circus, and people can go from table to table and taste things from Four Rivers and oh my goodness, Ancient Olive and Peterbrook Chocolate and oh, my mind is failing me right now. Trina over at Seven Bites, all these restaurants. And this year we just obviously weren't able to do that. And so thus we are in a situation that we are now and the way it's set up. And so we hope that you'll join us again next year. We hope to get back to the way that we usually do Taste4Toolbox. And I'd like to just take a moment and literally applaud for them, because we wanted to invite them this year to come as our guests. And a lot of them are running restaurants and things like that and weren't able to get here. But if you would, let's just put our hands together for all those people. So 10 years ago, this coming August, we started the 306 Foundation, Jane and myself. It began in an effort to help women in the crosshairs of things such as sex trafficking, domestic abuse, and other hardships. We knew, as Martin Luther King said, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We learned quickly that human trafficking was and is a complex web of issues, problems, and challenges that are not easily solved. We brought it to people's attention, and with others' help, changed laws, helped to get some homes built for their care and helping them transition back to life, and to escape the grip of the things that they were suffering at the time. We also realized that that web caught women and put them in prison and addiction behaviors, put them on the street with no place to lay their head, suffering PTSD from the trauma of the interactions they were having with men 8, 10, 15 times a day. They needed an ear and a place to begin again. So with a small group of volunteers and one chef, we started the culinary program. Around that culinary program, we added in some of the things that Scott mentioned, life skills, professional skills, and health and wellness classes. Most importantly, we did the best we could to just love the snot out of them. Not all women in our program suffered from the trauma of sex trafficking, but all of them suffered something and needed a place to begin and believe in themselves. As we got to know our students, we began to see patterns. We saw weaknesses in systems designed to help but really hurt. We heard stories that would break your heart. We saw how easy it might be to turn to drugs, hopelessness, and despair. We saw gaps in our own character, understanding and prejudices that we harbored. Simple answers no longer worked or sufficed. It was and is messy. We knew we needed a larger net, a larger heart, a bigger message. It wasn't just women caught in prostitution, but a whole group of folks marginalized from opportunity, resources, and having very few choices. Our eyes opened further, our arms wider, and our hearts deepened. To this, 4 years ago, we added the construction skills program and opened the culinary program to men. We now see and understand that folks at the margins of our community may need help, but we also needed them. Father Greg, our speaker tonight, said, "We don't go out to the margins to change people. We go to the margins to be changed." That happened for us. In 8 years, we've seen, listened, learned, adapted our methods, listened some more, and then listened again. In preparing for tonight, I looked over the photos that you saw and many, many others of our students, teachers, and classes. It gave me a sense of peace, thanksgiving, and a healthy pride in what we've been able to be a part of. By we, I mean all the folks and people who have helped to bring it all together each year. It started with an idea to help. We didn't realize how much it would help us. Our first motivator, influence, and help came from a man you will hear tonight. We were 6 months past leaving our day job. I heard him being interviewed on a national public radio program about his new book, Tattoos on the Heart. When it was over, I ordered the book and read it within just a couple of days. 4 months later, I found myself in LA with a group of other people starting small nonprofits across the country and actually around the world to see what we all might learn. That was 2013. Greg and the homies have been a big help and influence and inspiration in what we do, how we do it, and how we see those that we are helping. I hope you will enjoy your evening tonight, and I hope to get an opportunity to meet each and every one of you. Thank you again for coming.
To give you an idea of how inspirational Father Greg was for John and Jane, I first met them, I guess it was close to 10 years ago, when I think they called me down, if memory serves, down to their little office on Orange Blossom Trail, and they told me they wanted to start a nonprofit to help victims of human trafficking. And I said, oh, that is really exciting, and where are you getting your funding from? And they said, yeah, we hope to know that soon. And I said, oh, well, that's great. Didn't you tell me you all quit your jobs? And they said, yeah. I said, that's a faith I don't have. So I am grateful for people like you who do. And they have adapted and followed it and made it their own. And tonight you're going to hear from the man who, as John said, largely inspired that. He has a special talent for inspiration. In fact, he's what I would call a contagious Christian. And contagious is a scary word during a pandemic. But this man is contagious in all the best ways, the kind of man who makes others want to know more about the faith that he's living so that they might get a taste of it themselves. For years, he's run a unique ministry on the streets of Los Angeles, helping people who have been beaten down to get back up. In the book that John mentioned, Tattoos on the Heart, he writes about finding God's love in the most unusual and also the most common of places, at an ATM, where a former gang member had a revelation while waiting for Father Greg to bring back a $20 bill, if memory serves. From a woman who told a story on any of 7 city buses that she had to take every single Sunday to visit her son in prison, who was only 15 years old at the time, and many funerals that he attended over. I read a recent interview with Father Greg where he said that the pandemic has asked us to grieve, to even lean into that grief, and yet also to realize that right around the corner from grief is often joy. Father Greg speaks about surrendering to what you know is unchangeable, and yet also working like hell to change what you know is possible. It's sort of like the Serenity Prayer on steroids. I know Father Greg lives that work, so you're going to hear a little bit about that. And afterwards, by the way, if you want to ask questions, we're doing a little different, say for the pandemic. In your bags, you have 3x5 cards, and I think John and Jane and their helpers will be collecting those. If you want to ask Father Greg a question, feel free to jot it down. But right now, please, everyone, get ready to be inspired, and a big, warm welcome to Father Greg Boyle.
Thank you very much. I'm rusty. This is my first time speaking in front of people I haven't done it in 13 months, so lower your expectations. So it's odd, I've done all these Zooms, 1,000 of them, but not with actual people. And so a lot has transpired. I sport this kind of pandemic haircut. I had a homie, I just lost the microphone. I had a little homie come in and thanks. And he looked at me, and I hadn't seen him in months, and he just looked positively stricken, and he said, "Oh no, chemo?" I said, "No, it's my new look." I'm glad I'm here. First of all, I love John and Jane. They're friends. I'd do anything for them. And They are the shape of God's heart. Just so that if you were ever wondering what the shape of God's heart looks like, it looks like Jane and John. But a month ago, I was taking my morning walk, and I fell, and I tripped, and I stumbled, and I slid face first into the street, so I looked like hell. I had 2 big black eyes, and I requiring six stitches here, and wrecked my glasses. And as the doctor was sewing up my finger, I said, "Doc, I work with gang members. I need my middle finger." And fortunately, she was able to save it, so it's fully operational now. So I've been practicing too. So, our vision of gathering here is really to imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. You support Toolbox for Life in 306 Foundation because you want to dismantle the barriers that exclude. You want to imagine a community of beloved belonging and a place of kinship and exquisite mutuality. So you go to the margins because that's the only way they will ever get erased, is by all of us collectively standing there in our own particularity, in our own way and gifts, to stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, and to stand with those whose dignity has been denied, and to stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear, and then we find ourselves falling backwards into the great gift there is to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And we stand there because it's the only way we can create a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. And we're always bracing ourselves, because if you quit your job and you have no money to start a foundation and an endeavor such as Toolbox for Life, well, you brace yourselves because people will accuse you of wasting your time in standing at the margins. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "In this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." And so other voices get heard when we situate ourselves in the proximity of the margins and the folks there. The other day I was in my office, and a homie came in who works in the bakery. His name is Carlos. And he's a gang member covered in tattoos, most notably 2 very large pronounced devil's horns tattooed on his forehead. And, in fairness to him, he's been chipping away through our tattoo removal program to and so they're lighter than when I first met him. He works in the bakery now, working side by side with a rival gang member, a guy he used to shoot at. I've known him for a while, and I buried his father, who died of a heroin overdose. His father went to Vietnam at 18 years old and met the acquaintance of heroin. And Carlos got up at his funeral and said, "I tried heroin myself because I wanted to know why my father loved it more than me." Just before the pandemic, Carlos and I and another guy named Robert, we flew to Sacramento, pre-pandemic days, and we were going to speak the next morning in Sacramento. And so we arrived on a Sunday evening. It was later than I like to arrive at places. And so we get on the shuttle bus, the electric bus that takes you to the rental car place, and so Robert sits across me somewhere towards the back of the bus, but Carlos sits way in the very back seat. And I watch people get on the bus, and they assiduously kind of avoid sitting next to Carlos because he's got these big-ass devil's horns on his forehead. And I watched them sort of foxtrot, as they kind of do this dance to kind of land anywhere but next to him. Until finally there are only 2 seats left, and they're right on either side of them, and people reluctantly plunk themselves down. And so the shuttle bus starts to go to the rental car place, and it's very dark and secluded and wooded. And somewhere in the middle of this dark and secluded area, the bus breaks down, and it's just all the lights are out, and we're in pitch black darkness. And the driver is click, click. And I'm sorry, I'm doing the best I can, she says. And for some reason, it's utterly silent. No one is speaking until a voice from the back of the bus appears and says, "I saw this in a movie once. It does not end well." Well, the whole bus just exploded in laughter. At Homeboy, the homies always say, at Homeboy Industries, we laugh from the stomach. And everybody was laughing from the stomach. And I suspect that half that bus voted a certain way in recent elections, and the other half voted another way. And yet there we were, suddenly kinship so quickly, exquisite mutuality. There was no us and them, there was just us. And there we were connected to each other, where some distance had been bridged, brought to you by laughter generated by a guy with big old devil's horns. So Carlos shows up in my office the other day, and he's got a hairnet on, and he's got his mask, and he's got an apron dusted with flour. And during the pandemic, I was able to help him fix his teeth, so he was grateful. So he came in there and he said, "AG, can I take off my mask so you can see my grill?" And I said, "Sure." And so he takes it off, big old Colgate smile and big white teeth and perfectly aligned, and he exaggerates the smile to kind of showcase his dental work. And then he says to me, "Not only did you pay for this smile, you are the reason I'm smiling." And before I can say anything, he goes, "Hey, that's good. Write it down." And I start to write it down. In fact, he redictates it to me. Not only did you pay for this smile, and the two of us, we laugh from the stomach. And people on the margins will come to you with a disorganized attachment, as psychologists would say. Mom was either frightened or frightening, and you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. And so they look to you to welcome them and to receive them so that they feel safe. And then they can begin the hard work of healing. The homies at Homeboy Industries always say, we're used to being watched, but we're not used to being seen. And something happens when a human being is seen. The Buddhists say, "O nobly born, remember who you really are." It is our task to remind people, to hold the mirror up and tell people that they are exactly what God had in mind when God made them. And then people become that truth, and then they inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge, but they need to be seen so that they can put one foot in front of the next and feel safe in doing it. Every homie and homegirl who walks through our doors, some 15,000 of them a year, come barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace, and the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness, which is the highest form of spiritual maturity. And so we receive the tender glance from the God we actually have, and then we choose to become in the world that tender glance. I think when I spoke here last, my mom had just died, 92 years old, and had 8 kids, and I had buried my father some 22 years prior. And she died the way everybody would want to die, in her own bed, in her own house, surrounded by all her kids and a handful of grandkids. And she was sharp as a tack till the very end. In fact, in her last year of life, she watched so much MSNBC, she was becoming Rachel Maddow, and she wasn't a lick afraid of dying. In fact, I remember 3 weeks before she died, she looked at me with positively giddy and excited, and she said, "I've never done this before," which is something you might say just before skydiving. And in fact, the day before she died, I was all alone at the foot of her bed, which never happened, and she was sleeping, and when she woke up, she saw me there, and she said, "Oh, for crying out loud," and she went back to sleep. Well, she was pissed off that she was still alive, and I'm sorry. But the very next day at exactly noon, she was knocked out, and again, I was there by myself, and she just opened her eyes, and she lifted her head, and she let out this wondrous, glorious gasp. Skydiving. And no one in earshot of the sound could ever be afraid of dying again. But I remember in the last weeks of her life, she'd be in and out of consciousness, and 1 or 2 or 4 or all 8 of my siblings would be gathered around her bed, and she'd come to, and she'd lock on to one of us, and she'd say with breathless delight, "You're here. You're here." And everyone at the margins awaits only that, for you to see them, because they've carried so much and their suffering is so huge and their request is so small. See me. Oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. There's an odd line in the Acts of the Apostles, and it says simply, "And awe came upon everyone." And it suggests that the measure of our health as a community may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. For the principal suffering of the poor throughout history and throughout Scripture is shame and disgrace. I remember several years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia, and it was what we call in the biz a gang in-service, and so it meant that social workers commandeer a hotel ballroom from 9 to 5, and they have a variety of keynotes and workshops and breakout sessions, and I had done many of these where you go and teach social workers about gangs and why kids join them, and they get credits to listen to you. And so I'd done this many times, and I said yes, figuring I'd probably maybe give a keynote or something, and so I bought my ticket. Well, a week before I was to fly, I pull out the original invitation letter, and to my horror, I discovered that I was to be the only speaker from 9 to 5 all damn day. And I said to myself what the homies often say, "Oh, hell no, I am not going to be the only speaker." So I invited 2 homies, trainees, Andre and Jose, and it's an 18-month training program which sort of parallels the 18 months it takes to connect to the caregiver for an infant. It's comparable. And these two guys, I put them into my office, and they're from enemy rival gangs, and they're like in their 9th month in our training program. And I sit them down and I said, look, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia at the end of the week. I'd like you to get up in front of 600 social workers, and I'd like you to, tell your stories. Take your time, because we got a long-ass day to fill. So I never heard their stories, and Jose gets up first, and he's like 25 years old, and a gang member, been to prison with tattoos and such. And at that juncture, though, he had found himself as kind of aligned with the substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery, and now he's helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. So not only did he have a stretch as a prisoner, he also had a long stretch as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. And so he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when my mom looked at me and said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp. And he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish, he said to them. And we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. And then he continued, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage and she knocks on the door. And the guy comes to the door and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days. Until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine, and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day, my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through. The second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? Then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion. And he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. And if we welcome our own wounds, we can laugh from the stomach. The Dalai Lama says, get people to laugh, they'll change their minds. And on top of that, see them. The Christmas carol, O Holy Night, says, long lay the world in sin and error, pining till he appeared, and the soul felt its worth. And yeah, it's a song about Christmas, and yeah, it's a song about Jesus, but how is it not the job description of everyone in this room? You appear, and the soul feels its worth. It's not so much something you bestow on somebody, but because you've chosen to go to the margins and get proximate and put yourself in the vicinity of folks, the widow, orphan, stranger. Because you do that, everyone gets to inhabit their common nobility and dignity, and it is exquisitely mutual. In the old days, when I was a pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles and had 8 gangs at war with each other, and the LAPD called my parish the place of the highest concentration of gang activity anywhere, which I didn't know when I arrived. Every night on my black beach cruiser, I would ride into the projects and sort of patrol, put that Uzi down. Are you sure you want to shoot that guy? Things like that. And I was in Aliso Village one night straddling my bike, and I was talking to 8 guys in this dimly lit archway in the projects. And I looked over in the parking lot, and I could see this guy named Bandit. We all called him Bandit. And he was a gang member, but he was also a drug dealer. So as drugs were dealt in those days, he was running up to a car selling crack cocaine. And then he was walking back to where he didn't know I had arrived, and he was counting his money. And I wish I could say he was embarrassed that I had arrived while he was gone, but he wasn't so much. And he always resisted any offer I made of help. And he never stepped foot in Homeboy Industries until the day he did. And I couldn't believe it when I saw him, and he said what gang members often say, I'm tired of being tired. And so he began with us, and he came to terms with the horror show that had been his life. And he came to terms with the things he had done as well. And he transformed his pain so he didn't have to transmit it anymore. And honest to God, if his story had been a flame, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. I would not have survived a single day of his childhood. And so he got tattoos removed, and he did therapy, and he attended every imaginable class like anger management and grief and loss, and he entered deeply into recovery and didn't get high again. And at the end of his 18 months with us, our job developers were able to locate gainful employment beyond us. A warehouse job, entry level, first kind of job, low pay. And then, 5 years after that, he was running the whole floor, the floor manager. And then years after that, he was promoted and elevated even further. He got married, bought a house, had 3 daughters. I hadn't heard from him in a really long time, and no news is usually good news, with a gang member. So until he called me one Friday afternoon late in the day, and he had panic in his voice, and he said, "Gee, you got to bless my daughter." And I said, "¿Qué pasó, mijo? Is she sick? Is she in the hospital?" "Oh, no. On Sunday, she's going to Humboldt College." Imagine, my oldest, my Jessica. But she's a tiny little chaparrita, and she's only 18, and Humboldt's far. It's way up north. "I don't know. Do you think you could give her a blessing before she goes?" And I said, "Are you kidding? I'd be honored. Look, tomorrow is Saturday. I have baptisms at 1. Why don't you all come in, and we'll give her a little send-off." And sure enough, right at 12:30, they show up ready to get their blessing, and there's little tiny Jessica. And so I stand her in front of the altar, and I ask everybody to encircle her, and everybody touch her, and everybody connect to her, and put your hands on her arms. Go ahead, put your hands on her head, and bow your heads, and close your eyes. And as the homies say, I do a long-ass prayer. I just go on, and somewhere in the middle of this thing, I notice we've all become chillones, which is we're crying. Every last one of us, we're just weeping. And I don't know why we're crying, except for the fact that Bandit and his wife don't know anybody who's ever gone to college except me. Certainly nobody in their family. So I finish my prayer, and we, wipe our eyes, and we all kind of laugh at how mushy, we all got. And to change the subject, I look at little Jessica and I say, "Hey, tell me, what are you going to study at Humboldt College?" And she was very quick, "Forensic psychology." And I go, "Damn, forensic psychology?" And Bandit over here chimes in, "Yeah, she wants to study the criminal mind." Jessica turns and looks at her father and does one of these, and he sees her and he laughs. He says, "Yep, I'm going to be her first subject." So we go out to the parking lot, and we all give each other big abrazos, and they all pile in the car, but Bandit hangs back, and I'm so glad he has. And I look at him and I said, "You know what? I give you credit for the man you've chosen to become, for choosing to walk in your own footsteps. I'm proud of you." And Bandit's eyes fill up with tears, and he can barely speak. And he says, "You know what? I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife, a bueno para nada, a good for nothing. I guess I showed them." I said, "Yeah, I guess you did." And the soul feels its worth. Exactly right. People at the margins, they're used to being watched, but they're not used to being seen till you appear, and the soul feels its worth. Till you appear and you hold up the mirror and say, "You're exactly what God had in mind when God made you." Till you appear and you look folks in the eye and you say, "You're here. You're here. Oh, nobly born. Remember who you really are." And it's at that moment of exquisite mutuality where there is no daylight separating us, when we're all laughing from the stomach it's at that moment when we cease to care if anyone accuses us of wasting our time at the margins. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Greg. It's always memorable and it's always inspirational. Tonight, when you came, you got one of those white bags over there with a 306 on it. It has some goodies in there. I hope that was satisfying to you. And I'd like you to find in there, in your bag, there's an envelope and a card. Before we have a chance to have some questions, Q&A with Greg, I just wanted you to possibly be a part of, if you're not already, about what we're doing, give you that opportunity. So we're working in here, like we've mentioned, to kind of bring health and healing to our community. Our desire is for it to be stronger, more resilient, safer. And if tonight's program and message has lifted and encouraged you, and you'd like to be a part of what we're doing, just please use that envelope. You can do a bank draft, you can write a check, you can do credit card, you can do whatever you'd like. You can think about it and use the envelope later. For those of you who are tech savvy, you can Venmo the 306 Foundation, just the 306 Foundation, if that's the way you like to do things. And if you'd like to get involved or volunteer, do something different, got an idea, whatever it may be, feel free to reach out to us through that envelope or our website. You can contact my wife, Jane, or myself. And thanks again for spending the time with us this evening. We appreciate you coming. Scott?
All right, thank you, John. Father Greg, I always try to take a little something away from every talk I hear, and I love the expression, you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. That's, I'm going to find a way to work that into my column and try to soothe some of those sons of guns up in Tallahassee if I get a chance. But right now, we are going to let you all ask some questions to Father Greg. And if you have some, you feel free to just bring it up to me. I've got some cards already to get us started. If you wouldn't mind coming up here, and I'll give you a little space. And in fact, I don't even need the microphone, but I've got a few to get us started. And one, if people have read your book, they may know, but if they haven't, can you give us the brief story of how Homeboy Industries started?
Okay, the brief story. In 1988, I was pastor, and we started a school, and then we started a jobs program where we tried to locate jobs for, try to find felony-friendly employers, and then we couldn't find that many, so we started businesses. So Homeboy Bakery was our first, and Homeboy Tortillas was our second about a month later. And not everything worked. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Apparently, people didn't want gang members in their homes, so I did not see that coming. But and so now we have 9 social enterprises, which kind of obviously got a monkey wrench during the pandemic. And but recycling, we have a variety of restaurants. It's I flew out of Terminal 4, American Airlines, and there's our restaurant there. Line down the hallway there, which is nice because that had been closed for quite some time. And so the idea is we're not, we don't exist for people who need help. It's only for those who want it. So you have to kind of walk through the doors. So I think 33 years ago, we were all about nothing stops a bullet like a job, which is what our T-shirt said, and that was our motto. But then probably 15 years in, we realized that an educated gang member may or may not go back to prison, and an employed one may or not reoffend. But then it became our absolute guarantee that a healed gang member will not ever go back to prison, period. And so, and that's been our contention ever since. So that's been our focus. So we call it therapeutic mysticism at Homeboy, which is how can you see, if you can see the whole person. Of course, you can't see the whole person if you don't see the whole person. And once you see that in yourself, a whole person can see the whole person in the other. And so, and then they leave us after 18 months, and the world is going to throw at them what it will, but this time they're not going to be toppled, which is different than what we were previously doing. We were employing people, finding jobs for them, and then, you know, that guy's lady left him, and he was back in the old ways. So we think this is truer. We acknowledge that healing ends in the graveyard for every human being, but there's a kind of an essential foundational healing that if you surrender to it, it's impactful.
Thank you. When we were chatting beforehand, I asked you, I think not so eloquently, don't you ever just get tired? I would think doing this day in and day out would get exhausting. And this question is related. It says, where and how do you get renewed for and from your work?
Yeah, it's kind of the burnout question, you know. So I learned this the hard way. You know, I learned it in the early days of doing this, that if you go to the margins to make a difference, then it's about you, and it can't be about you. If you go to the margins to fix, save, rescue people, then you will be depleted. But if you go to the margins to delight in the people there, if you allow them to reach you, if you receive who they are, if you let them alter your heart, then it's eternally replenishing. I felt bad. Somebody wrote a book on self-care of people in ministry, and she asked me to read it and to write a blurb on the book, and I did, but I felt bad because I kind of don't believe it. I had a homie come into my office, a senior staff member, but a gang member, and he says, I guess I'm just too compassionate because I need 2 weeks off because I guess I just let it in too much. I go, no, it just means you're doing it incorrectly. You know, because if you're delighting in the people in front of you, it's eternally replenishing. So I kind of don't buy all that stuff. Yeah, go for a long walk and sleep 8 hours and eat right or whatever. All that stuff's good. But if you're burning out, it's because you've allowed it to become about you. And so I learned that lesson really a long time ago. I get exhausted, but I've never come close to burnout since the time I came to that, conclusion based on a dream that a homie had about me and him in a very dark room, and I had a flashlight that I aimed on the light switch. And he said he knew he was the only one who could turn that light switch on, and he was happy that I had the flashlight. And he turns it on, and he's sobbing and telling me the dream. And the room is flooded with light. And he says, the light is better than the darkness, like he didn't know that to be the case. I've never had this happen to me in my whole 66 years of living. I knew in an instant that I had been doing it incorrectly, that I was trying to turn the light switch on for people. And I stopped doing it from that very moment that he shared that dream with me. And so, every one of you has a flashlight and every one of you knows where to aim it, and that has to be enough for us.
That is very powerful. I also took away from that you will, in fact, write book blurbs even if you don't like the books. Is that right? So as a writer, I may call on you for that. All right, you said you let out 66. This next question says, how long do you see yourself continuing to do this work?
Well, human beings stop healing in the graveyard, and Jesuits retire in the graveyard. So as long as I can put one foot in front of the next, I intend to do this. What else would I do? I don't know.
Thank you. All right, and here's what. How about this? Who are your heroes? Or for people from whom you draw inspiration, if you don't like the word heroes.
Well, Jane and John are heroes and local heroes. I always answer it the same way. The homies are my heroes because I grew up in the gang capital of the world, but I won all these lotteries, the zip code lottery, the parent lottery, the sibling education, mental health lottery. I won all the lotteries. And the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God than the thousands of men and women I've been privileged to know. So they're always my heroes, and I, I'm not making that up.
Thank you. All right, here's somebody who was listening. They said that you said tenderness is the highest form of spiritual maturity. What are the first steps towards making that happen?
A theologian and mystic, Meister Eckhart, who died in 80 something, he said it's a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort you. We don't really believe that. We think it's all about challenge, and the harder thing is the better thing, and we think it's about grim duty. But it's really about receiving the tender glance and then choosing to be the tender glance. Behold the one beholding you and smiling. And that's sort of the key for me, that it's about receiving the tender glance. I've gotten to know a friend who's a mystic and writes about mystics, Mirabai Starr. I recommend her books. And I was on a podcast with her not that long ago, and she wrote a book called God of Love. And she says, once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods. And that for me is so wise. And so it's about that. It's about joy. It's about my joy, yours, your joy complete. It's finding your true self in loving, and then loving being loving. It's really kind of that simple. And so tenderness, if love is the answer, community is the context. But tenderness is really our methodology. It's the mystical, therapeutic methodology. Otherwise, love stays in your head, or in the air, or in your heart even. But unless it becomes tender, there's no connective tissue. And tenderness is the thing that connects.
Thank you. All right, this one is very specific and not anonymous. This is from Kathy from Ocala, who is your biggest fan, in case you did not know that. And Kathy says they are still looking to buy a tattoo removal device in Ocala, and is wondering if you hear from any others around the country that are looking to acquire, and I guess maybe just advice you might have on getting tattoo removal devices.
Well, I couldn't help notice that one of your sponsors, Aggressive Appliances, who knows, they may have, along with belligerent blenders, they may have, we've lost it again.
Belligerent.
You have.
Battery may have run out.
Yeah.
Maybe our last.
That's okay. That's how God says this is our last question. But you know what? They're expensive. You know, I can't remember now. We have 3 of them, and that's been the one thing that's delayed because of the pandemic, because our clinic is so close quarters. And so anyway, all our doctors now are fully vaccinated, and they've figured out kind of an airflow thing. But I'm sure I'm dated on this. You know, I thought they were like 50 grand, but I'm sure they're 100 grand now. You know, where are you? Who asked that question?
Kathy.
Yeah, yeah. So they're expensive, but you know, I'll tell you though, in terms of fundraising, and I'm sure John has this experience. Once you have a concrete thing, a laser tattoo removal machine, people love that. Rather than general operating expenses or salaries or whatever you need to run your thing, they love the concrete thing. So my experience is tattoo removal gets funded right away, fast. You need a new machine, it's like that. Because people kind of gravitate toward the concrete. And they can say, yeah, I helped pay for that, or I bought it, you know. So, but it's, you know, not every mistake, most mistakes you can't erase, but there's one that you can, and that's really gratifying for gang members. And we don't force anybody, even the ones who work for us. You know, if Carlos wants to get his, he does, but that was up to him in his time. And homies used to lift their shirts and big, huge tattoos, you know, and I just go, oh, keep your shirt on. No one will see it. And he goes, my son will. I said, okay. Hugely painful, very long process, but now his son doesn't ask him any questions. Anyway, thank you all very much.
Thank you all.